The dawn does not arrive gently. It arrives the way all decisive dawns arrive, with a slow bleeding of light along the eastern horizon that turns the darkness from black to grey to the pale, washed-out blue of a sky that knows what is about to happen beneath it and has chosen to watch with the impassive detachment of something that has witnessed 10,000 such mornings and will witness 10,000 more. Turhan is already standing when the first light touches the hilltop. He has not slept. He does not sleep before battles. Not because he is afraid, but because his body has learned, through years of conditioning, that the hours before combat are not hours for rest, but hours for communion. The deep, silent, intensely private communion between a warrior and the violence that awaits him. The conversation that happens not in words, but in the slow, deliberate process of preparing the body and the mind and the soul for the thing they are about to do. He has already prayed. The Fajr prayer, offered in the darkness before the first light, performed on the cold earth of the hillside, with his forehead pressed against ground that will, before the day is over, be stained with blood. He prayed with the soldiers around him, their voices barely audible, their bodies forming lines in the darkness like the ranks of an army that fights not with weapons, but with faith. And in the prayer was the thing that always precedes the battle, the acknowledgement that life is a loan from God, and that the repayment of that loan, when God demands it, is not a tragedy but a transaction, not a loss but a fulfillment, not the end of the story, but the beginning of a chapter that only the dead can read. Now he stands on the hilltop and looks down at the valley. The morning mist fills it like milk poured into a bowl, white and thick and impenetrable, concealing the valley floor and the approaches and the enemy positions on the far side. The mist is an ally. It will provide cover for the initial movement. It will allow the Ottoman cavalry to descend from the reverse slope and cross the open ground before the enemy's archers can establish their range. It will buy them minutes, perhaps only seconds, but in the economy of battle, seconds are the currency that purchases survival. Alauddin Jandar appears beside him. The field commander has been awake for hours, reviewing dispositions, checking supply lines, conferring with his subordinate officers, doing the 100 small things that must be done before a force of 2,000 men can be transformed from a collection of individuals into a single instrument of coordinated violence. He looks at the mist, and he looks at the sky, and he makes a calculation that only experienced commanders can make, the calculation of timing, the estimation of how long the mist will last based on the temperature and the humidity and the angle of the sun and the direction of the wind, the translation of meteorological observation into military advantage. He says, we have perhaps 1 hour before the mist lifts. If we move now, we can be in position before they see us. Turhan nods. He has already reached the same conclusion. He has already communicated it to the cavalry commanders through the system of hand signals and whispered messages that the Ottomans use when silence is essential, a system that was developed on the steppes of Central Asia by warriors who understood that the difference between life and death is often the difference between being heard and not being heard. The army moves. It moves with a silence that seems impossible for 2,000 men and 2,000 horses, but the Ottomans have practiced this movement 100 times, 1,000 times, in training exercises that were designed to teach exactly this skill, the ability to move a large force through terrain without creating the noise that would alert an enemy to their presence. The horses' hooves are wrapped in leather. The weapons are secured against the body to prevent rattling. The armor, light as it is, has been padded at every point where metal might strike metal. The soldiers communicate through touch and gesture, a tap on the shoulder meaning advance, a raised fist meaning halt, an extended palm meaning spread out. They descend from the reverse slope in 3 columns. The center column, led by Alauddin Jandar himself, will advance directly into the valley and engage the enemy's front line. The left column, led by a commander named Damir Khan, will swing wide to the north and strike the enemy's right flank. The right column, led by Turhan, will perform the most dangerous maneuver of all, a deep encirclement that will take them around the southern edge of the valley, behind the enemy's positions, cutting off their retreat and trapping them between the 3 prongs of the Ottoman attack. This is the hammer and anvil, the oldest tactical concept in the history of warfare, as old as the first time one group of humans figured out that attacking from two directions at once is more effective than attacking from one. But the Ottoman version of this tactic is not the crude, bludgeoning hammer and anvil of ancient armies. It is refined. It is precise. It is the product of generations of tactical evolution, each generation building on the lessons of the last, each campaign producing new insights that are incorporated into the doctrine and transmitted to the next generation of commanders through the rigorous, comprehensive, utterly unforgiving training system that is one of the Ottoman military's greatest strengths. Turhan leads his column south. They ride through the trees that line the southern edge of the valley, moving in single file, each horse following the one ahead, each rider watching the rider in front, the column flowing through the forest like a river of shadow, silent, relentless, unstoppable. The trees provide cover, the mist provides concealment. And Turhan's presence at the head of the column provides something that neither trees nor mist can provide, the absolute confidence of men who know that they are being led by the best, and who will follow him into any darkness, through any danger, against any odds, because they have seen what he can do and they believe, with a faith that goes beyond reason and into the realm of the sacred, that as long as Turhan rides at the front, they cannot be defeated. They clear the southern edge of the forest. The valley opens before them, wider here than at the center, the hills lower, the terrain more open, the ground firmer, better suited for cavalry. Turhan surveys the landscape with the quick, comprehensive glance of a man who has been reading terrain since before he could read words, and he identifies the approach route that will bring them behind the enemy's positions with maximum speed and minimum exposure. He signals his column. They accelerate. The walk becomes a trot. The trot will become a canter. The canter will become a gallop. And the gallop will become the charge that will hit the enemy's rear with the force of a thunderbolt and the precision of a surgeon's blade. But not yet, not yet. The timing must be perfect. The charge must coincide with the central column's engagement of the enemy's front. If Turhan charges too early, the enemy will have time to reorient, to turn their archers, to form a defensive line facing south. If he charges too late, the central column will bear the full weight of the enemy's resistance and the casualties will be catastrophic. The moment must be exact. The synchronization must be flawless. And the only thing that can achieve this level of synchronization across a distance of 2 miles with no means of direct communication is the shared understanding that exists between commanders who have trained together and fought together and who know each other's minds with the intimacy of brothers. Turhan trusts a Lordin Jandar to attack at the right moment. A Lordin Jandar trusts Turhan to be in position when the attack begins, and both of them trust the plan, which is itself a form of trusting the Sultan who designed the plan and trusting God who inspired the Sultan. The chain of trust extends upward from the riders in the mist, to the commander on the hill, to the Sultan in his palace, to the God who sits above all of it, watching, guiding, permitting, the ultimate author of a story whose ending only he knows. The enemy camp, the other side of the valley. Shahanshah wakes to the sound of horns, not Ottoman horns, his own horns, the horns that his sentries are blowing to signal that something is moving in the valley, something large, something that the mist is concealing, but that the sentries can feel, the way animals feel an earthquake before it strikes, as a vibration in the earth, a change in the air pressure, a disturbance in the natural order that the body registers before the mind can name it. He rises from his cot. He dresses quickly, pulling on armor that has been laid out beside his bed in the precise arrangement that allows the fastest possible transition from sleep to readiness, a habit acquired through years of living in war zones where the difference between dressing quickly and dressing slowly can be the difference between life and death. He emerges from his tent and looks at the valley and sees nothing but mist, white and dense and infuriatingly opaque, hiding whatever is moving down there behind a curtain of water vapor that his eyes cannot penetrate. Damerhan is already outside. He has been awake for hours, unable to sleep, packing the perimeter of the camp with the restless energy of a man whose instincts are screaming a warning that his mind cannot articulate. He has felt this before. He has felt it in the hours before every battle he has ever fought, the premonition of contact, the sixth sense that warriors develop after years of exposure to danger, the ability to feel the presence of an enemy the way a blind man feels the proximity of a wall, not through sight, but through the subtle changes in air movement and sound reflection that the conscious mind ignores, but the unconscious mind registers. He says to Shahanshah, "They are coming." Shahanshah says, "Who is coming? We have no intelligence suggesting an attack." Yaqid said the Ottoman force is concentrated in the south. Yaqid said they are preparing for a naval engagement. Yaqid said this front is quiet. Damahan looks at him with the contempt that a professional warrior reserves for a political leader who places too much faith in intelligence reports and too little faith in instinct. He says, "Yaqid is either wrong or lying. The earth is shaking. Listen, can you feel it? Horses, many horses, moving in formation, moving toward us." Shahanshah listens, he feels, and slowly through the layers of denial and complacency and the desperate hope that the intelligence is correct and the attack is not happening, and this is just a false alarm triggered by nervous sentries and an overactive imagination, the truth penetrates. The earth is shaking. The vibration is unmistakable. It is the vibration of cavalry, a large body of cavalry, moving through the valley toward their positions. He orders the alarm. The horns that have been sounding sporadically now sound continuously, the harsh, braying blast of bronze instruments whose sound is designed not for beauty, but for urgency, for the primal, undeniable message that danger is approaching and every man must be at his post, and every weapon must be in hand, and every prayer must be on the lips, because the time for preparation is over and the time for action has begun. The camp erupts. Soldiers pour out of tents, pulling on armor, grabbing weapons, shouting instructions that are drowned out by other instructions shouted by other men. The organized chaos of an army being jolted from rest into readiness. The transformation of sleeping individuals into a fighting force that must happen in minutes or not at all. Damahan takes command, not because he has been given command, but because he is the only man present who has the experience and the authority and the sheer, overwhelming force of personality to impose order on chaos. He positions his infantry along the palisade line. He deploys his archers on the platforms that were constructed for exactly this purpose. He holds his small cavalry reserve behind the center, ready to be committed wherever the pressure is greatest. He does all of this with the speed and precision of a man who has done it 100 times before and who could do it in his sleep, which is essentially what he is doing since he has not slept in 30 hours. Mahmud arrives from his tent, half-dressed, his face pale with the sudden, nauseating fear that comes when a man who is accustomed to planning battles is confronted with the reality of fighting one. He asks what is happening. Damahan tells him. Mahmud asks what they should do. Damahan tells him to shut up and stay out of the way and let the soldiers do their work. Because this is not a council meeting, this is a battle, and in a battle, the only voice that matters is the voice that gives orders, and the only hands that matter are the hands that hold weapons. Yaqid appears. He stands at the edge of the camp, looking at the mist-filled valley, and his face is the face of a man who is realizing that the information he provided was wrong, that the intelligence he fed to Damahan and Shahanshah and Andronikos was false, that the Ottomans are not in the south, but here, right here, emerging from the mist like ghosts from a nightmare, and the implications of this realization are cascading through his mind like dominoes falling, each one knocking down the next, the false intelligence. The false positions, the false strategies, all of them collapsing into the terrible, inescapable conclusion that he has been used, that the Ottomans knew he was a traitor, that they fed him lies, that every piece of information he passed to the enemy was a piece of the trap that is now closing around them. His face goes white. His hands begin to shake. He backs away from the edge of the camp, instinctively seeking distance from the approaching danger, the ancient reflex of prey that sees a predator and runs. He thinks about fleeing. He thinks about mounting a horse and riding in any direction that takes him away from this valley and this battle and the consequences that are bearing down on him with the unstoppable momentum of 2,000 Ottoman cavalry. But there is nowhere to go. The valley is closing. The trap is shutting. And Yaqid stands at its center, caught between the army he betrayed and the army he joined, belonging to neither, trusted by neither, wanted by neither, a man without a country and without a cause and without a future. The charge. The mist begins to lift. The sun, climbing above the eastern hills, burns through the moisture with the patient, irresistible power of a force that cannot be opposed and cannot be delayed. The white curtain thins. Shapes begin to appear, first as shadows, then as silhouettes, then as distinct forms, recognizable, identifiable, terrifyingly real. Horses, hundreds of horses, moving in formation. Their riders low in the saddle, their weapons drawn, their faces set with the expressions of men who have already committed to the act they are about to perform and who will not stop, cannot stop, will not turn back, will not hesitate, will not falter, will not do anything except ride forward faster and faster, until they hit the enemy line with the combined force of their momentum and their mass and their absolute, unshakable, divinely ordained conviction that what they are doing is right. Alauddin Jandar leads the center column. He rides at the front, his sword raised, his voice carrying across the formation with the clarity and authority of a man who was born to command. He does not shout a war cry. He does not need to. His soldiers know what to do. They have known since the moment they mounted their horses in the darkness before dawn. They have known since the moment they were selected for this mission. They have known since the moment they first picked up a sword and felt its weight in their hands and understood, with the instant, intuitive certainty of the called, that this was what they were made for. The distance closes, 1 mile, half a mile, a quarter mile. The archers on the enemy's platforms begin to fire. Arrows arc through the thinning mist, rising in clusters, reaching their apex, pausing for one weightless instant at the top of their trajectory, and then descending, falling toward the Ottoman horsemen with the hissing, whispering sound that every soldier who has ever charged an archer line knows and fears, the sound of death descending from the sky like rain. The Ottomans do not slow, they do not swerve. They lean forward in their saddles and press their faces against their horses' necks and make themselves as small as possible and ride through the arrow storm the way sailors ride through a squall, with gritted teeth and closed eyes and the trust that the storm will pass and they will emerge on the other side, battered perhaps, bleeding perhaps, diminished perhaps, but alive and moving and still coming. Arrows find targets, riders fall, horses stumble and crash and roll, and the riders behind them swerve to avoid the tumbling bodies and the thrashing hooves. The formation adjusts, contracts, fills the gaps left by the fallen with the seamless, automatic precision of a system that has been designed to absorb casualties without losing cohesion. The fallen are left behind. There is no time to stop, no time to mourn. No time to do anything except ride forward, ever forward, toward the line of palisades, and the men behind them, and the terrible, intimate, face-to-face violence that awaits. They hit the palisade line at full gallop. The impact is catastrophic. The timber barriers, designed to stop infantry, are not strong enough to stop the combined mass of 1,000 horses moving at 30 miles an hour. They shatter, they splinter, they explode inward, sending fragments of wood flying in all directions like shrapnel from a bomb, and the horses pour through the gaps and into the enemy camp with the unstoppable force of a river breaking through a dam. The fighting begins. It is not the fighting of stories and legends and heroic poems. It is not clean or noble or glorious. It is the fighting of the real world, the messy, chaotic, horrifyingly personal business of killing human beings at close range with edged weapons, the sound of steel on steel and steel on bone and steel on flesh, the screams of the wounded and the grunts of the fighting and the terrible, bubbling silence of the dying, the smell of blood and sweat and horse and fear, and the sharp, copper tang of adrenaline that fills the nostrils and the throat and the lungs until the entire world tastes of war. Alauddin Jandar fights from the saddle. His sword rises and falls with the mechanical rhythm of a man who has been doing this for so long that the act of killing has become a physical habit, as automatic and as unremarkable as breathing. He does not think about what he is doing. Thinking is for the moments between battles. During the battle itself, the mind surrenders to the body, and the body does what it has been trained to do: attack, defend, parry, strike, advance, retreat, the ancient dance of combat performed with the speed and the precision of a master. From the north, Damir Khan's column hits the enemy's right flank. The impact is devastating. The flank, already weakened by the transfer of soldiers to the center to meet a Lordin Jandar's frontal assault, collapses under the pressure. Damir Khan's cavalry sweeps through the disintegrating flank like a blade through cloth, cutting units off from each other, isolating groups of soldiers, creating pockets of resistance that are surrounded and overwhelmed one by one. And from the south, the sound that Shahanshah has been dreading, the sound that Damir has been expecting, the sound that announces the final, irrevocable closure of the trap. Turhan's charge. It comes from behind, from the direction that no one is watching, because everyone is watching the front and the flank, and no one imagined, no one believed, no one considered the possibility that an entire column of Ottoman cavalry could circle around the southern edge of the valley without being detected and arrive behind the enemy's positions at exactly the moment when the battle at the front was reaching its crisis point. But Turhan did it. He did it because he is Turhan, and because the impossible is merely the difficult viewed from the wrong angle, and Turhan has never viewed anything from the wrong angle in his life. His column emerges from the southern tree line at full gallop. The sound of their hooves fills the valley like the sound of approaching thunder, a rolling, building, crescendoing roar that shakes the earth and the air and the hearts of every man who hears it. The enemy soldiers at the rear, the reserves, the supply handlers, the wounded who have been carried back from the front line, they see the Ottoman cavalry bearing down on them, and they know, with the instant, visceral certainty of prey that has been cornered, that the battle is lost. Some fight, the brave ones, the stubborn ones, the ones who would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. They form hasty defensive lines and brace themselves and raise their weapons and meet the charge with the courage of men who know they are going to die and who choose, in the last moments of their lives, to die well. Some run, the pragmatic ones, the ones who understand that survival is not cowardice but strategy, that living to fight another day is not a defeat but a deferral, that the man who runs from a lost battle lives to win the next one. They drop their weapons and flee into the forest and the hills and the valleys, scattering in all directions, each man finding his own path, his own hiding place, his own temporary sanctuary in a world that has been transformed, in the space of a morning, from a position of strength into a killing ground. And some simply stand. They stand and they watch the Ottoman cavalry sweep through the camp, and they do nothing. They are not fighting and they are not running. They are frozen, paralyzed by the speed and the violence and the overwhelming, incomprehensible scale of the disaster that has befallen them. They are men whose minds have been broken by the gap between what they expected and what has happened, the gap between the intelligence that told them the Ottomans were in the south and the reality that shows them the Ottomans are here, everywhere, in front of them and behind them and on both flanks, closing around them like the fingers of a fist. Turhan rides through the camp. His sword sings. The blade is an extension of his arm, and his arm is an extension of his will, and his will is an extension of the Sultan's strategy, and the Sultan's strategy is an extension of God's plan, and the chain of causation that connects the movement of Turhan's sword to the will of the Almighty is unbroken, uninterrupted, as continuous and as inevitable as the chain that connects the raindrop to the cloud to the ocean to the sun. He finds Damir, not by searching, not by asking, not by following clues or tracking footprints or analyzing the patterns of the retreating enemy. He finds Damir the way a hawk finds its prey, by instinct, by the pull of a gravity that exists not between bodies but between destinies, the invisible force that draws two warriors toward each other across the chaos of a battlefield, because the universe knows, even if they do not, that their stories are intertwined, and that the resolution of one requires the confrontation of the other. Damir is fighting. He is fighting with the desperate, magnificent, utterly hopeless fury of a man who knows that he has lost everything and who has decided, in the burning core of his being, that if he must lose then, he will lose on his feet, with his sword in his hand and his enemies bleeding at his feet, and the last word on his lips being not a plea for mercy, but a curse upon the man who defeated him. He has killed 3 Ottoman soldiers. Their bodies lie around him in the attitudes of violent death, twisted and broken, and still, he is wounded. A cut across his forehead bleeds freely, painting half his face red, and a deeper wound in his side stains his armor with a spreading darkness that he does not feel because the adrenaline has anesthetized his body, and the fury has anesthetized his mind, and the only thing he can feel is the weight of his sword, and the movement of his muscles, and the burning, all-consuming desire to kill one more enemy before the end comes. Tarhan sees him, he pulls his horse to a halt, he dismounts. This is not a gesture of respect, though it contains respect. It is a tactical decision. Damerhin is fighting on foot, and a mounted warrior against an unmounted warrior is not a fair contest, and Tarhan does not fight unfair contests, not because he is bound by rules, but because he is bound by honor, and honor, for a warrior of Tarhan's caliber, is not a code imposed from without but a standard erected from within, a standard that he would die rather than lower. They face each other. The battle rages around them. Men are fighting and dying and screaming and bleeding within arm's reach, but Tarhan and Damerhin are encased in a bubble of silence, a space that the chaos of the battle cannot penetrate, a zone of absolute focus and absolute concentration where nothing exists except two men and two swords and the distance between them. Damerhin speaks first. His voice is raw, scraped thin by hours of shouting and fighting and the effort of staying alive in a world that is trying very hard to kill him. He says, Tarhan, of course it is you. They send their best to finish what they started. What Orhan started when he took my home and my land and my heritage and left me with nothing but this sword and this body and this rage that will not let me die quietly. Tarhan says, you have a choice, Damerhin. You can surrender. You can lay down your sword and accept the Sultan's justice. The Sultan is merciful. He has shown mercy to enemies who deserved none. He will show mercy to you. Damerhin laughs. It is a terrible laugh, a sound that has nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the dark, bitter, poisonous joy of a man who has been pushed past the point of caring about consequences. He says, mercy. You offer me mercy. What is mercy to a man who has lost everything? What is mercy to a man whose name has been taken and whose land has been stolen and whose family has been scattered and whose honor has been ground into the dirt by the boots of the man you serve? Mercy is the gift of the victor to the vanquished. I am vanquished, Tarhan, but I am not defeated. There is a difference. The vanquished can be shown mercy. The defeated cannot, because defeat is not a condition of the body. It is a condition of the soul, and my soul will never accept defeat. Not from Orhan, not from you, not from God himself. Tarhan says, then you have chosen. Damerhin says, I have chosen. They fight. It is not a long fight. The epic duels of legend, the hour-long contests between evenly matched warriors that storytellers embellish with supernatural feats and divine interventions, these are fictions. Real fights between skilled warriors are short, brutally short, decided in seconds by the margin of speed or strength or technique or luck that separates one man from the other. The human body can sustain maximum effort for a limited time. The human mind can maintain absolute focus for a limited duration. And the window of opportunity in which a decisive blow can be delivered opens and closes with the speed of a blinking eye. The fight lasts 11 seconds. In the first second, Damerhin attacks. A powerful overhead strike aimed at Tarhan's head, delivered with the full force of his arm and his shoulder and his back and his rage. A blow designed not for precision, but for destruction. The blow of a man who does not care whether he lives or dies as long as his sword finds its target. In the second through the fourth seconds, Tarhan defends. He does not parry the blow directly, because a direct parry against an opponent of Damerhin's strength would cost him momentum and position. Instead, he deflects, angling his blade so that Damerhin's sword slides along its edge and past his body, the energy of the strike redirected rather than absorbed, flowing past him like water around a stone. In the fifth and sixth seconds, the momentum of Damerhin's missed strike carries him forward, past Tarhan, and for a fraction of a heartbeat, his back is exposed. Tarhan does not exploit this opening. He waits, because the back is not where warriors deliver killing blows. The back is where cowards strike, and Tarhan is not a coward. In the seventh and eighth seconds, Damerhin recovers. He turns, he raises his sword again, and in his eyes, Tarhan sees the thing that he has been looking for since the fight began, the thing that will determine its outcome. He sees exhaustion, not the exhaustion of the body, though the body is exhausted, the exhaustion of the spirit. The deep, terminal, irreversible fatigue of a man who has been fighting not just this battle, but every battle, not just today, but every day, not just against Tarhan, but against the entire world, for so long and with so little success that the fire that has been driving him is beginning to flicker. In the 9th second, Damon attacks again, but the attack is slower, half a heartbeat slower, an infinitesimal deceleration that would be invisible to anyone except a warrior of Tarhan's caliber who measures the world in fractions of heartbeats and who can distinguish between the speed of a fresh strike and the speed of a tired one the way a musician can distinguish between two notes that differ by a single vibration. In the 10th second, Tarhan moves. He moves with the explosive, concentrated power of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment, conserving his energy while Damon spent his, maintaining his focus while Damon wavered, positioning himself with the patient precision of a predator that knows that the kill depends not on speed, but on timing. His sword describes an arc that begins at his hip and ends at the level of Damon's wrist, a low, fast, rising cut that targets not the body but the weapon hand, not the life but the ability to fight. In the 11th second, the blade connects. It strikes Damon's wrist with the sharp, clean impact of steel on flesh and bone, and the sound it makes is a sound that every warrior knows and every warrior fears, the sound of something vital being severed, the sound of a man's ability to fight being taken from him in an instant. Damon's sword falls. It hits the ground with a clang that seems, in the sudden silence that has descended upon this small space in the midst of the greater chaos, impossibly loud. Damon looks at his hand. He looks at the blood. He looks at Tarhan, and in his eyes is not pain because the pain has not arrived yet, will not arrive for several seconds, the body's shock response delaying the signal that the nerve endings are frantically sending. In his eyes is surprise, genuine surprise. The surprise of a man who believed, truly believed, that his rage and his determination and his refusal to accept defeat would be enough to overcome the gap in skill between himself and the greatest swordsman in Anatolia. They were not enough. Nothing is enough against Tarhan. Tarhan steps forward. He places the point of his sword against Damon's chest, not pressing, not cutting, just resting there, the lightest possible contact, a reminder of what the sword can do and a statement of what Tarhan is choosing not to do. He says, "Yield." Damon looks at the sword point. He looks at Tarhan's face. He looks at the battlefield around them, the shattered palisades, the burning tents, the scattered bodies of his soldiers, the Ottoman cavalry sweeping through what remains of his army like a scythe through wheat. He sees the totality of his defeat. He sees it not as an abstraction on a map or a report delivered by a messenger, but as a reality, physical, tangible, undeniable, written in blood and fire, and the terrible silence of the dead. He does not yield. He does not speak the word. He does not make the gesture. Instead, he does something that Tarhan does not expect. He sinks to his knees, not in surrender, not in submission, but in exhaustion. The final, absolute, complete exhaustion of a man who has nothing left. No strength, no will, no rage, no hope. Nothing but the blood running from his wrist and the breath leaving his lungs, and the slow, terrible realization that the story he has been telling himself, the story of revenge and restoration and the reclamation of everything he has lost, is over. Tarhan lowers his sword. He signals to two soldiers. They come forward and bind Damon's wound and lift him to his feet and lead him away, and Damon goes without resistance, without protest, without looking back, a man walking away from the wreckage of his life with the numb, disconnected gait of someone who is present in body but absent in everything else. The aftermath. The battle is over. The valley is quiet. The mist has lifted completely, and the sun illuminates a landscape that has been transformed by violence. The green and brown of the natural world overlaid with the red and black of the human one, blood on the grass, ash in the air, the scattered debris of a military engagement that lasted less than 2 hours, but that has changed the strategic balance of the region in ways that will take months to fully understand. Shahanshah is captured. He was found hiding in a supply cart, buried beneath sacks of grain, his imperial dignity abandoned in favor of the more immediate imperative of not being killed. The soldiers who found him dragged him out and stood him before a lord in Jandar, and the field commander looked at the man who had once styled himself the power behind the Byzantine throne and saw nothing but a frightened, middle-aged politician in borrowed armor, blinking in the sunlight, trembling in the morning air, asking in a voice that cracked with every syllable whether the Sultan would show him mercy. A lord in Jandar said nothing. He ordered Shahanshah bound and guarded and prepared for transport to Bursa, where the Sultan himself would decide his fate. This is not a lord in Jandar's decision to make. He is a field commander. He commands battles. He does not determine the fates of prisoners. That responsibility belongs to the Sultan alone, because the treatment of prisoners is not a military matter but a political one, and political matters are above the pay grade of soldiers, no matter how senior. Mahmud escaped. He fled the battlefield in the first minutes of the engagement, mounted on a fast horse, heading east, toward the territories controlled by the Turkmen tribes that Demirhan had been trying to recruit. Whether he will find sanctuary there or whether Suleyman Bey, having heard the outcome of the battle and having made his own calculations about the future, will turn him away or turn him over, remains to be seen. And Yakid is gone. He vanished during the battle. No one saw him leave. No one saw him ride away. He simply disappeared, the way traitors always disappear, slipping through the cracks in the chaos, exploiting the confusion that he helped create, using the skills of deception and evasion that are the stock in trade of the double agent to remove himself from the consequences of his actions. The soldiers search for him. They search the camp and the surrounding forest and the roads that lead away from the valley in every direction. They find his horse abandoned at the edge of the forest, its saddle removed, its reins cut, set free as a decoy to suggest that he continued on foot in a different direction than the one he actually took. They do not find Yakid. Tarhan stands at the center of the ruined camp and looks at the empty space where Yakid should be. He knows that the traitor's escape is not an ending but a postponement. Yakid is still out there, still carrying the secrets he stole, still dangerous, still capable of causing damage, still a loose thread in the fabric of the Ottoman state that must be found and cut before it unravels something important. He turns to a lord in Jandar. He says, "Send word to Halima Khatun. Tell her that Yakid has escaped. Tell her that finding him is now the highest priority. Tell her that the Sultan wants him alive, not because the Sultan is merciful, though the Sultan is merciful, but because a dead traitor tells no tales, and a living traitor, properly questioned, can reveal the full extent of the damage he has caused and the full scope of the network he has compromised." A lord in Jandar nods. He sends the message. And across the valley, across the hills, across the miles that separate the battlefield from the city, the message travels, carried by a rider on a fast horse, carried by the wind and the urgency and the inexorable momentum of a war that has been won in one place and is being fought in 100 others, a war that is not over, will not be over. Cannot be over until every enemy has been defeated and every traitor has been found and every stone of the empire has been laid, and the great tree of Osman's dream has grown so tall and so wide that its branches touch the sky and its shade covers the world. The rider gallops toward Bursa. The sun climbs higher. The dead are counted. The wounded are treated. The prisoners are bound. And the living, the men who fought and survived, the men who walked through the valley of death and emerged on the other side, they stand in the ruins of the enemy camp, and they look at each other, and they see in each other's eyes the same thing that soldiers have always seen after battle. Relief, exhaustion, grief, and gratitude. Gratitude to God who brought them through. Gratitude to the Sultan who sent them. Gratitude to each other who fought beside them. And gratitude to the fallen who gave everything so that the living could stand here in the sunlight, in the silence, in the aftermath, and breathe. The war is not over, but this battle is won. And in the winning, a message has been sent to every enemy of the Ottoman state, a message written in blood and fire, and the shattered remnants of an army that thought it could stand against the tide of history. The message is simple. We are here. We are coming. And we will not be stopped. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. The war is not over. The swords are still wet. The prayers are still rising. And the Ottomans, the children of Osman, the builders of empires, the carriers of a destiny that was written in the stars before the first stone of the first city was laid, the Ottomans march on. Toward the dawn. Toward the future. Toward God. The eastern wind carries dust and the memory of hoofbeats. Turhan rides alone now, having sent his escort back at the last river crossing, because the man he is going to meet will not speak to a delegation. He will speak only to a warrior, and Turhan is the finest warrior the Ottoman state possesses, a fact acknowledged by friends and enemies alike with the same reluctant, grudging, undeniable certainty with which one acknowledges the sharpness of a blade pressed against the throat. He rides through territory that is familiar to him in the way that a childhood home is familiar to a man who left it decades ago and has returned to find it changed. The same landmarks in different positions, the same rivers flowing in different directions, the same sky arching over a landscape that has been rearranged by time and conflict, and the slow, relentless erosion of the old world by the new. These are the lands of the Turkmen tribes, the vast, rolling grasslands where his grandfather rode and his father rode, and where he himself learned to sit a horse before he learned to walk, where the wind tastes of wild time and horse sweat, and the indefinable essence of freedom that is the birthright of every nomad and the obsession of every settled man who has forgotten what it feels like. The tribe he seeks is the Jermian, not the largest of the Turkmen confederations, but arguably the most dangerous, because the Jermian combine the mobility of nomads with the discipline of a standing army and the pride of a people who trace their lineage back to the earliest Turkish migrations from Central Asia. Their current leader is a man named Suleyman Bey, a warrior of legendary skill and equally legendary stubbornness, a man who has refused every overture from the Ottoman state for the past 15 years on the grounds that accepting Ottoman authority would mean surrendering Jermian independence, and Suleyman Bey would rather die than surrender anything. Turhan knows this man. They met once, years ago, at a tournament held to celebrate a temporary peace between the Turkmen principalities, one of those brief, fragile interludes of cooperation that punctuate the otherwise constant state of rivalry and competition that defines relations between the tribes. Turhan was young then, still building the reputation that would eventually make him the most feared swordsman in Anatolia, and Suleyman Bey was already old, already established, already carrying the weight of a legend that had grown so large it was impossible to distinguish the man from the myth. They fought in the tournament, an exhibition match, theoretically non-lethal, conducted with blunted swords before a crowd of thousands who had come from every corner of the Turkmen world to watch the best of the best test themselves against each other. The match lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes of the most technically brilliant, physically demanding, mentally exhausting combat that either man had ever experienced. At the end of it, Turhan was bleeding from a cut above his left eye, and Suleyman Bey was favoring his right leg, where Turhan's blunted blade had struck with enough force to crack the bone beneath the armor. The match was declared a draw. Neither man accepted the verdict. Both believed they had won, and the unresolved nature of their contest had hung between them ever since like an unpaid debt, a question without an answer, a conversation that was interrupted before it reached its conclusion. Now Turhan is riding to resume that conversation, not with swords this time, with words, with arguments, with the desperate, urgent, impossibly important task of persuading a man who does not want to be persuaded that his future lies not with Demirhan's rebellion, but with Orhan's empire. He reaches the Jermian camp at sunset. The camp is enormous, a city of tents stretching across the grassland like a living organism, thousands of goat hair shelters arranged in concentric circles around the central tent, where Suleyman Bey holds court. The camp is alive with activity, horses being groomed, weapons being sharpened, children running between the tents playing games that are, upon closer inspection, not games at all, but training exercises designed to develop the reflexes and the instincts that will transform these children into the warriors they are expected to become. Tarhan is spotted by the outriders before he reaches the camp perimeter. They ride out to intercept him, a dozen young men on fast horses, their bows strung, their arrows nocked, their eyes bright with the aggressive curiosity of warriors encountering a stranger in their territory. They surround him. They demand his name and his business and the reason he has come to the German camp alone and unarmed, which is either the bravest thing they have ever seen or the most foolish, and they have not yet decided which. Tarhan gives his name. The effect is immediate. The outriders look at each other. They know the name. Every Turkmen in Anatolia knows the name. It is the name that mothers use to frighten disobedient children, and that warriors use to inspire themselves before battle, and that storytellers use to hold their audiences spellbound around campfires that burn late into the night. Tarhan, the man who cannot be killed, the man who intercepts arrows with his bare hands. The man who fought Suleyman Bey to a draw at the Tournament of Peace, and who has, in the years since, accumulated a catalogue of military achievements so extraordinary that they have passed from the realm of history into the realm of legend. They escort him to the central tent. They ride on either side of him, not as guards, but as an honor escort, because whatever their political allegiances, whatever their feelings about the Ottoman state, these are Turkmen warriors, and Turkmen warriors respect excellence in combat the way priests respect excellence in prayer, as a manifestation of the divine, as proof that God's favor rests upon the shoulders of those who carry it. Suleyman Bey is waiting. He stands at the entrance to his tent, a massive figure despite his age, shoulders as broad as a yoke, hands as large as shields, a face that looks as though it was carved from the same granite that forms the mountains visible on the eastern horizon. His beard is white. His eyes are black. His expression is the expression of a man who has been expecting this visit and who has prepared for it the way he prepares for everything, with the meticulous, comprehensive, utterly thorough attention to detail that has kept him alive and in power for longer than most of his contemporaries have been alive at all. He looks at Tarhan. Tarhan looks at him. And for a moment, the two men simply stand there, separated by the years and the politics and the different paths they have chosen, united by the shared language of the warrior, the unspoken understanding that exists between men who have dedicated their lives to the perfection of violence and who recognize in each other the same discipline, the same dedication, the same willingness to die in the pursuit of excellence. Suleyman Bey speaks first. He says, Tarhan, the last time I saw you, you cut my leg and I cut your face. We were supposed to settle the matter. You never came back. Tarhan says, I was busy. Suleyman Bey says, busy conquering the world for your master. Tarhan says, busy building a world worth conquering. Suleyman Bey smiles. It is a hard smile, the smile of a man who appreciates wit but who does not let appreciation interfere with judgment. He says, come inside, eat, drink, and then tell me what Orhan wants, because you did not ride 3 days through hostile territory to discuss our unfinished match. They enter the tent. They sit on carpets woven from the wool of German sheep, by the hands of German women, using patterns that have been passed down through generations so numerous that their origin has been lost in the fog of antiquity. They eat roasted lamb and flatbread and drink fermented mare's milk from leather cups that smell of horse and sweat, and the peculiar, sharp, not unpleasant tang of a drink that has sustained the Turkmen people through millennia of wandering across the grasslands of Asia. They eat in silence. This is the Turkmen way. Food is consumed before business is discussed, because a hungry man makes bad decisions, and a bad decision made at a meal table can lead to consequences that outlast the meal by centuries. They eat until they are full, and then they drink until the cups are empty, and then they sit back on the carpets and look at each other across the fire that burns in the center of the tent, its smoke rising through the opening at the apex and disappearing into the night sky where the stars are beginning to appear, one by one, like sentries taking their positions for the long watch. Turhan speaks. He does not begin with politics. He does not begin with strategy or threats or promises. He begins with a story about Osman, about the dream that Osman had, the dream of a great tree whose roots were in the mountains of Anatolia and whose branches stretched across the seas and the continents, covering the world in shade, providing shelter and sustenance and justice to all who lived beneath its canopy. He tells the story the way it has been told to him, the way it was told to Orhan, the way it was told by Osman himself to those who followed him in those early days when the Ottoman state was not a state at all, but a handful of tents and a few dozen warriors, and a dream so vast and so improbable that only a madman or a prophet could have conceived it. Suleiman Bey listens. His face reveals nothing. He has heard this story before in different versions from different mouths, each one emphasizing different aspects and drawing different conclusions. He knows the story. He does not necessarily believe the story. He is a man who believes in what he can see and touch and fight, not in dreams and visions and the mystical pronouncements of holy men who claim to speak for God. But he listens because the story is being told by Turhan, and Turhan is not a storyteller. Turhan is a warrior, and when a warrior tells a story, it carries a different weight than when a poet tells it, because the warrior does not tell stories for entertainment. The warrior tells stories to explain why he fights. And why a man fights is the most important thing you can know about him, more important than how he fights, or where he fights, or against whom he fights, because the why is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Turhan finishes the story. He lets the silence that follows fill the tent the way smoke fills a room, gradually, pervasively, touching everything. And then he says, Suleiman Bey, Daymahan has come to you. He has offered you an alliance. He has told you that the Ottoman state is your enemy, that Orhan's empire will destroy the Germian way of life, that your independence, your traditions, your freedom to ride where you please and camp where you please and fight whom you please will be taken from you and replaced with taxes and laws and the suffocating bureaucracy of a centralized state that answers to no one but itself. Suleiman Bey's eyes narrow. He says, you know about Daymahan. Turhan says, I know everything about Daymahan. I know that he came to you 3 days ago with a dozen riders and a chest of Byzantine gold. I know that he sat where I am sitting and ate your food and drank your milk and told you that the Ottomans are your enemy. And I know that you listened, because you are Suleiman Bey, and Suleiman Bey listens to everyone before he decides anything. Suleiman Bey says, he offered me more than words. He offered me Eskişehir. He offered me the territory between the two rivers. He offered me independence and sovereignty and the right to govern my people according to our own laws and our own traditions without interference from any sultan, Ottoman, or otherwise. Turhan says, and what did he ask in return? Suleiman Bey says, my swords, my riders, my warriors on the field when the time comes to face your master's army. Turhan says, and you are considering this. Suleiman Bey does not answer immediately. He reaches for his cup, he drinks, he sets the cup down, and then he says, I am considering it because I have no better option. Your master sends me messages demanding my loyalty. Daymahan sends me messages offering my independence. One man demands, the other offers. Which would you choose, Turhan, if you were me? If you were a free man being asked to choose between a master who demands and a partner who offers, which would you choose? Turhan is quiet for a moment. This is the critical juncture. This is the fulcrum upon which everything balances. If he says the wrong thing now, if he misjudges the man sitting across from him, if he miscalculates the mixture of pride and pragmatism and warrior honor that constitutes Suleiman Bey's character, the Germian will join Daymahan and the Eastern Front will collapse, and the war that is coming will become a war on two fronts, which is a war that even the Ottomans cannot win. He says, I would choose the man who tells me the truth. Suleiman Bey says, and which man is that? Turhan says, Daymahan is lying to you, Suleiman Bey. He cannot give you Eskişehir because Eskişehir does not belong to him. It belongs to whoever controls the army that occupies it, and Daymahan does not control that army. He lost his army at Çanarlı. He lost his territory. He lost his reputation. The man who sits across your fire and offers you cities and rivers and sovereignty is a man who has nothing. He is paying you with coins he does not possess, writing promises on paper he cannot honor, selling you a future that exists only in his imagination. Suleiman Bey's expression does not change, but something shifts in his eyes, a flicker, a doubt, the first tiny crack in the wall of certainty that Demirhan's visit had constructed. Turhan presses forward. He says, and there is something else Demirhan did not tell you. He did not tell you who his allies are. He did not tell you that the gold he brought was Byzantine gold. He did not tell you that the alliance he represents is not an alliance of Turkmen tribes fighting for freedom, but an alliance of Turkmen traitors and Byzantine usurpers and Christian empires whose stated objective, whose explicit, openly declared, non-negotiable condition for participation is the absorption of every inch of Turkmen territory into the Byzantine Empire. Every inch, Suleiman Bey, including the Germian lands. Including the grasslands where your grandfather rode and your father rode, and where your children ride today. Demirhan is not offering you independence. Demirhan is offering you as a sacrifice to Andronikos. He is selling your swords to a Christian emperor who will use them to conquer the very lands you are trying to protect. The silence that follows is absolute. The fire crackles. A horse whinnies somewhere in the camp. A child laughs in a distant tent, the laughter carrying across the night air with the clear, bell-like quality that only children's laughter possesses, the sound of innocence in a world that has no room for it. Suleiman Bey stares at Turhan. He stares at him for a very long time, and in that stare is the calculation of a lifetime, the weighing of loyalties and suspicions and hopes and fears that has defined his existence since the day he assumed the leadership of his tribe and accepted the burden of responsibility for their survival. He is trying to determine whether Turhan is telling the truth. He is searching Turhan's face for the signs of deception that he has learned to recognize over decades of negotiation and conflict, and the endless, exhausting business of leading a people who are as proud and as stubborn and as ungovernable as the horses they ride. He does not find the signs. He does not find them because they are not there, because Turhan is telling the truth. And the truth has a quality that no amount of skill can counterfeit, a simplicity, a directness, a lack of embellishment that distinguishes it from lies the way sunlight distinguishes itself from moonlight, not by being brighter, but by being warmer. Suleiman Bey says, if what you say is true, then Demirhan has betrayed us. He has betrayed every Turkmen who has ever lived. He has sold our swords to the people who want to destroy us. Turhan says, it is true. I stake my honor on it. I stake my name. I stake the name of my sultan, and I stake the outcome of our unfinished match, Suleiman Bey. If I am lying, you may finish what we started at the tournament. I will not defend myself. Suleiman Bey looks at him, and then, slowly, the old warrior's face changes. The hardness does not disappear, because hardness is not something that disappears from the face of a man like Suleiman Bey, but it rearranges itself. It restructures around a different core. The hardness was, until this moment, directed at Turhan. Now it redirects itself toward Demirhan, toward Andronikos, toward the alliance that has been trying to recruit the Germian as disposable soldiers in someone else's war. He says, what does your sultan offer? Turhan says, the sultan offers what no one else can offer. He offers a place within the empire, not as subjects, not as subordinates, not as conquered people paying tribute to a distant master, but as partners, as allies, as members of a federation that preserves the identity and the traditions of each tribe while uniting them under a single banner that is strong enough to protect all of them. The Germian will keep their lands. The Germian will keep their laws. The Germian will keep their leaders and their customs and their way of life. But they will ride under the Ottoman banner, and that banner will be their shield against every enemy, Byzantine or otherwise, that threatens their existence. Suleiman Bey says, and what does the Sultan ask in return? Turhan says, your riders on the field when the war comes, your swords beside our swords, your warriors beside our warriors, not as servants but as brothers, not fighting someone else's war but fighting our war, the war of every Turkmen against the people who have been trying to destroy us since we first crossed the mountains from the east, the Byzantines, the Crusaders. The Europeans who look at us and see not human beings but barbarians, not a civilization but a horde, not a faith but a heresy. They are coming, Suleiman Bey, they are gathering, and when they come, they will not distinguish between Ottoman and German, between loyal and independent, between the tribes who joined the empire and the tribes who refused. They will destroy us all, unless we stand together. Suleiman Bey is quiet for a very long time. The fire has burned down to embers. The stars have shifted in the sky. The camp is quieter now, the sounds of the evening fading into the deeper, softer sounds of the night, the breathing of horses, the murmur of distant conversation, the cry of a nightbird hunting in the darkness beyond the circle of tents. He says, "I need time." Turhan says, "You have it." The Sultan does not demand, the Sultan invites. But I will tell you this, Suleiman Bey, the time that remains is shorter than you think. Daymerhan is moving, Andronikos is mobilizing. The war that I am describing is not a possibility, it is a certainty. The only question is which side of the line you will be standing on when it begins. He rises, he thanks Suleiman Bey for his hospitality. He walks to the entrance of the tent and pauses there, silhouetted against the starlit sky, and he says one last thing. He says, "Our unfinished match, Suleiman Bey, I would prefer to finish it as allies on a training field with blunted swords and a crowd of our warriors watching and cheering and placing bets on the outcome. I would prefer that to the alternative. Because the alternative is finishing it on a battlefield with real swords and no crowd and no bets and no outcome that either of us would consider a victory." He leaves, he mounts his horse. He rides out of the German camp and into the darkness, and behind him, in the tent where the fire has turned to ash and the cups are empty and the remains of the meal have grown cold on their plates, Suleiman Bey sits alone and thinks. He thinks about Daymerhan and his Byzantine gold. He thinks about Andronikos and his imperial ambitions. He thinks about the territory between the two rivers that was offered to him like bait in a trap. He thinks about Turhan's face when he spoke, the absolute absence of deception, the terrifying sincerity of a man who does not know how to lie because he has never needed to. He thinks about the dream of Osman, the great tree, the spreading branches, the shade that covers the world. And he thinks about his own dream, the dream of every Turkmen since the first migration from the east, the dream of a homeland that is safe and permanent, and defended by walls that no enemy can breach, not walls of stone, but walls of brotherhood, walls of shared purpose, walls of the kind of unity that can only be achieved when individual pride is subordinated to collective survival. He does not make his decision tonight. He is Suleiman Bey, and Suleiman Bey does not make decisions in the darkness. He makes them in the light, after sleep, after prayer, after the mind has been cleared of the emotions that cloud judgment and the body has been freed from the exhaustion that impairs reason. But the direction of his decision is already visible, like the first faint glow of dawn on the eastern horizon, barely perceptible but unmistakable to those who know what to look for. The direction is toward the Ottoman banner, toward the empire, toward the great tree and its spreading branches and the shade that covers the world. Because Suleiman Bey is many things, he is proud, he is stubborn, he is difficult and demanding and impossible to satisfy, but he is not a fool. And only a fool would sell his people's swords to a Christian emperor who has promised to absorb their lands into his empire the moment the fighting is done. Bursa, the palace, dawn. Sultan Orhan receives 2 messages before the morning prayer. The first is from Turhan. It says that the meeting with Suleiman Bey has taken place, that no commitment was made but that the direction is favorable, that the German are listening, that the seed has been planted and the ground is fertile, and the rain, when it comes, will do its work. The second message is from Halima. It says that Yaqid has been fed the false intelligence, that he has passed it to Daymerhan's agents, that the enemy now believes that the main Ottoman force is concentrated in the south, near the coastal towns, preparing for a naval engagement against the Byzantine fleet. This is false. The main Ottoman force is, in fact, being assembled in the east, behind the hills that form the natural barrier between Ottoman territory and the territories controlled by Shahanshah, positioned for a preemptive strike that will shatter the eastern flank of the alliance before it has time to consolidate. The Sultan reads both messages. He places them on the table beside the map. He looks at the map. He moves the wooden figures. The Germian, represented by a small carved horse, moves closer to the Ottoman position. The Byzantine fleet, represented by a small carved ship, moves toward the southern coast, toward the phantom army that Yakid has told them is there. Damohan's forces, represented by a clenched fist carved from dark wood, remain in the east, waiting for reinforcements that will not arrive because Suleyman Bey is considering switching sides, and because the coastal towns that Yakid told them are vulnerable are, in reality, defended by a garrison that has been quietly reinforced over the past week. The picture on the map is beginning to look like something. Not a victory, not yet, because victory is a word that belongs to the future, and the future is uncertain. But a strategy, a coherent, comprehensive, multi-layered strategy that addresses every threat and exploits every weakness and positions the Ottoman state not as a defender reacting to attacks, but as an actor shaping the battlefield according to its own design. The Sultan allows himself a moment of something that is not quite satisfaction, but is not quite anxiety either. It is the feeling of a craftsman looking at an unfinished work and seeing in its incomplete form the outline of what it will become, the sense that the pieces are falling into place, that the design is emerging from the chaos, that the hours and the days and the weeks of planning and preparation and patient, painstaking labor are beginning to produce results. But he knows that plans are fragile things. He knows that the most carefully constructed strategy can be shattered by a single unexpected event, a single miscalculation, a single piece of information that turns out to be wrong, a single human being who behaves in a way that no one predicted. He knows that the map on his table is not the territory it represents, that the wooden figures are not the men and women they symbolize, that the distances between positions are not measured in inches, but in hours of marching through terrain that can be kind or cruel depending on the weather and the season and the mood of God. He goes to pray, he stands in the mosque beside his soldiers, he places his forehead on the ground, and he surrenders, not his authority, not his responsibility, not his will, but his certainty. He surrenders the illusion that he controls the outcome, the fantasy that his plans are sufficient, the prideful delusion that his intelligence and his experience and his strategic brilliance are enough to guarantee success. He surrenders these things because they are obstacles to the only thing that can truly guarantee success, which is the will of God. And the will of God is not something that can be controlled or predicted or influenced by human effort. It can only be accepted, embraced, trusted, with the total, absolute, unconditional trust of a servant who believes that his master's plan is better than his own. He prays, and in the prayer is the same thing that has been in every prayer he has ever spoken since he first learned the words as a boy in his father's tent, the same thing that was in Osman's prayers and in the prayers of every man and woman who has ever knelt before God and asked for help. It is the acknowledgement of smallness. The recognition that no matter how great an empire becomes, no matter how powerful a sultan grows, no matter how many battles are won and how many territories are conquered and how many enemies are defeated, the human being at the center of it all is nothing more than a speck of dust in the infinite expanse of creation, a fleeting moment in the eternal duration of time, a single note in the symphony that God is composing across the centuries. And it is in this recognition, in this smallness, in this surrender that true greatness is found, because the man who knows he is small does not make the mistakes of the man who believes he is large. The man who surrenders to God does not make the mistakes of the man who trusts only himself. The man who prays is not weaker than the man who does not pray. He is stronger, infinitely stronger, because his strength is not his own. It is borrowed from the source of all strength. And that source is inexhaustible. The prayer ends, the Sultan rises, he walks out of the mosque and into the morning light. The city is awake, the soldiers are at their posts, the merchants are in their stalls, the children are in the streets, the minarets stand against the sky like fingers pointing toward heaven, and the Ottoman state, fragile and imperfect and beset by enemies on every side, continues to exist, continues to function, continues to grow. Because it is not sustained by military power alone. It is not sustained by political cunning alone. It is not sustained by economic resources or strategic alliances, or the genius of its leaders. It is sustained by faith. By the faith of the Sultan who leads it, by the faith of the soldiers who defend it, by the faith of the women who nurture it, by the faith of the children who will inherit it, by the faith of every man and woman and child who lives within its borders and who believes, with a conviction that no army can shake and no argument can undermine, that this empire was ordained by God and that its destiny is in his hands, and that as long as they remain true to their faith, he will remain true to his promise. The eastern frontier, the gathering storm. The armies are moving, not yet toward each other, not yet in the final, terrible convergence that will produce the battle that everyone knows is coming. But moving nonetheless, shifting positions, consolidating forces, testing boundaries, probing defenses, the preliminary maneuvers of a conflict that has not yet begun, but that has already been decided upon by the men who make such decisions, the sultans and the emperors, and the commanders and the politicians who draw lines on maps and move wooden figures across tables and speak of strategy and necessity and the unavoidable logic of war. Shahanshah's forces are concentrated along the eastern approach. 3,000 men, roughly, infantry mostly, spearmen and archers, and a small contingent of cavalry provided by the Byzantine governor of the nearest province, a man whose loyalty to Andronikos is based not on conviction but on calculation, and who will switch sides the moment the calculation changes. They are arrayed along a line of low hills that command the valley through which any army approaching from the Ottoman heartland must pass, a natural defensive position that has been improved by the construction of timber palisades and shallow trenches, and the strategic placement of archery platforms that provide clear lines of fire across the valley floor. Daymerhen's forces are behind them, fewer in number but more experienced, harder, meaner, forged in the crucible of border warfare and tempered by the humiliation of defeat at Chanali. These are men who have nothing left to lose and everything to prove, men whose loyalty to Daymerhen is not political but personal, based not on ideology or allegiance, but on the simple, brutal calculus of survival. They follow Daymerhen because Daymerhen has kept them alive, and because the alternative to following Daymerhen is being alone in a world that has no patience for the alone. And behind Daymerhen, invisible, unknown, unannounced, the Byzantine fleet is moving. 20 ships, war galleys mostly long and sleek and low in the water, their hulls painted black, their sails dark, their oars manned by professional rowers whose muscles have been developed by years of pulling through the heavy waters of the Bosporus and the Dardanelles and the island-studded seas of the Aegean. They are heading south, toward the Ottoman coastal towns, toward the phantom army that Yakid has told them is concentrated there, toward a trap that they do not know exists, because the man who set it has been feeding them lies through the mouth of a traitor who does not know he is a tool. But the Ottomans are not where the enemy expects them to be. The Ottomans are here in the east, hidden behind the same hills that Shahanshah is using as a defensive position, positioned not in the valley where they can be seen, but on the reverse slopes where they cannot, concealed by the terrain and the trees and the disciplined silence of soldiers who have been trained to be invisible until the moment they are not. The Ottoman force numbers 2,000, fewer than the enemy, but these are Ottoman soldiers. These are men who have been selected not for their numbers, but for their quality, men who fight with the efficiency and the ferocity and the absolute, unwavering certainty that comes from believing that they are instruments of divine will. They carry curved swords and short bows and the light, flexible armor that allows them to move faster and strike harder than their heavier armored opponents. They are mounted, every one of them. Even the archers ride horses, because the Ottoman military doctrine, inherited from the steppe warfare traditions of Central Asia, is based on mobility, on the ability to attack from unexpected directions, to retreat before the enemy can respond, to reappear where they are not expected, to fight not as a wall of flesh and steel, but as a storm of movement and violence and calculated chaos. Tarhin has returned from the Jermian camp. He rides into the Ottoman position under cover of darkness and reports directly to the field commander, Alauddin Jandar, who has been given operational control of the eastern force by the Sultan himself. Tarhin tells him that the Jermian have not yet committed, that Suleiman Bey is thinking, that the decision could go either way, but he also tells him something else, something that changes the tactical picture. He tells him that the Germian are not the only tribe that Damahen has been recruiting, that there are others, smaller tribes, less powerful, but collectively significant, tribes that have already committed to Damahen's cause and that are, at this moment, moving toward the Eastern Front, riding to join the alliance, adding their swords and their riders to the force that is being assembled against the Ottoman state. Lord Injandar absorbs this information. He adjusts his plans. He sends riders to the flanks to watch for the approaching tribal forces. He orders the construction of additional concealment positions on the northern and southern slopes. He reviews the disposition of his own forces and makes changes, moving units from one position to another, adjusting angles of attack, repositioning reserves, doing the thousand small things that distinguish a competent commander from a brilliant one. And he waits. Because the art of war is not just the art of fighting. It is the art of waiting, the art of patience, the art of holding a coiled spring in compression and releasing it at exactly the right moment, not a second too early, not a second too late, but at the precise instant when the enemy is most vulnerable and the opportunity is greatest and the outcome is most favorable. The hours pass, the sun moves across the sky, the shadows shift, and the armies sit on their respective sides of the hills, separated by a valley that is perhaps 2 miles wide, close enough to hear each other's horses, but too far to see each other's faces, close enough to smell each other's cooking fires, but too far to count each other's numbers. The tension is unbearable. It is a physical thing, a pressure that builds in the chest and the temples and the stomach, a tightness that makes breathing difficult and thinking slow and patience almost impossible. The soldiers feel it. The horses feel it. Even the birds feel it. The hawks that usually circle above the valley in lazy spirals have disappeared, driven away by the accumulated weight of human anxiety that hangs over the landscape like an invisible fog. Night falls. The fires are lit, small fires, concealed fires, fires that provide warmth without providing light that could reveal positions. The soldiers eat cold food and drink cold water and sharpen their weapons one more time, running their blades across whetstones with the rhythmic, hypnotic sound that has preceded every battle in human history, the sound of preparation, the sound of anticipation, the sound of men making peace with the possibility that the next dawn will be their last. Tarhan walks among them. He does not speak. He does not need to. His presence is his speech. The sight of him, tall and scarred and impossibly calm, moving through the camp like a predator moving through its territory, is enough to steady the nerves of even the most frightened recruit. If Tarhan is calm, then there is reason to be calm. If Tarhan is unafraid, then there is reason to be unafraid. If Tarhan is here, beside them, sharpening the same sword and breathing the same air and facing the same dawn, then they are not alone. And in war, not being alone is the most important thing there is. He finds a spot on the hillside and sits. He draws his sword and lays it across his knees. He looks at the valley below, shrouded in darkness, hiding the enemy that waits on the other side, and he thinks about Suleiman Bey. He thinks about the old warrior sitting in his tent, weighing his options, measuring his loyalties, deciding the fate of his people, with the terrible freedom of a leader who knows that whatever he chooses, some of his people will die and some will live, and the ratio between the two will be determined by the quality of his decision. He thinks about the Sultan, back in Bursa, standing before his map, moving his wooden figures, seeing the whole picture while Tarhan sees only this piece of it, this valley, these hills, these soldiers, this night. He thinks about how strange it is to be part of something larger than yourself, to be a single thread in a tapestry so vast that you cannot see its edges, to know that your actions matter, but to also know that they matter only insofar as they contribute to a design that you did not create and cannot fully comprehend. He thinks about God. He thinks about the promise that was made to the faithful, the promise that those who fight in his cause will be rewarded, that those who die in his cause will be granted paradise, that those who endure in his cause will be given victory. He thinks about this promise, and he holds it in his heart the way he holds his sword in his hands, with familiarity and trust, and the absolute certainty that it will not fail him when the moment comes. The night deepens, the stars turn, and Tarhan sits on the hillside with his sword across his knees and waits for the dawn. Because the dawn is coming. And when it comes, the valley will fill with the sound of hooves, and the clash of steel, and the cries of men fighting and dying and killing and praying, all at the same time, all mixed together in the terrible, magnificent, incomprehensible symphony of war. And in that symphony, rising above the noise and the chaos and the blood, there will be one sound that endures, one sound that carries above all others, one sound that has been heard on every battlefield since the first warrior drew the first sword and raised it toward the sky. Allahu Akbar. God is greatest. And that sound, that declaration, that truth spoken in the face of death by men who believe it more deeply than they believe in the ground beneath their feet or the air in their lungs, that sound will carry across the valley and over the hills and through the forests and across the seas until it reaches the ears of every man and woman and child who has ever wondered whether faith is enough to sustain a people through the darkness. It is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough. The war is not over. The dawn approaches. The swords are ready. The hearts are full. And the Ottomans wait. Patient, silent, unbreakable. The pen moves. The ink is black. The page is the color of sand stained with the memory of blood. And the story continues because history does not pause for grief or gratitude or the exhaustion of those who carry its weight upon their shoulders. 3 days have passed since the emperor was brought to Bursa. 3 days since Asporça carried her father through the tunnels of the monastery and placed him in the arms of the Ottoman state. 3 days since the world shifted on its axis and the alliances that held the region together began to crack and reform like ice on a river in the first days of spring, breaking apart in one place and freezing together in another, the landscape of power changing shape with every passing hour. The emperor is still alive. This is itself a miracle or a testament to the skill of Hakim Ibrahim, or perhaps both, because in the world of the Ottomans, miracles and skill are not opposed but intertwined, two threads of the same rope, two branches of the same tree, the human effort and the divine assistance working together in a partnership that produces results that neither could achieve alone. The poison is still in his body. It moves through his blood like a whisper moving through a crowd, quiet, persistent, impossible to silence completely. But Hakim Ibrahim has slowed its progress. The herbs he administers 3 times a day, bitter concoctions that the emperor drinks with the stoic resignation of a man who has accepted that the indignities of treatment are preferable to the finality of death, are working. The color has returned to his face. The strength has returned to his hands. He can sit up now. He can speak in sentences rather than fragments. He can look at his daughter with eyes that are clear enough to see her and sharp enough to recognize the fear she is trying to hide behind her composure. He asks for Orhan. This request surprises Asporça, who has been assuming that her father would want to see as few Ottomans as possible, that his pride, the vast, imperial, centuries-deep pride of a Byzantine emperor, would prevent him from acknowledging the debt he owes to the man who was, until very recently, his empire's most dangerous adversary. But she is wrong. The emperor is beyond pride now. Pride is a luxury of the healthy and the powerful, and he is neither. What he wants is information. What he wants is understanding. What he wants is to look into the eyes of the man who holds his fate in his hands and measure him, assess him, determine whether this man is worthy of his daughter and his trust and the desperate, impossible gamble that his continued survival represents. The Sultan comes. He enters the emperor's chamber alone, without guards, without advisors, without the retinue of functionaries that normally accompanies him everywhere he goes. He enters as a man, not as a ruler, and this choice is deliberate because Orhan understands, with the instinctive political intelligence that has defined his leadership, that the emperor needs to see a man, not a title, needs to speak to a person, not a position, needs to feel that the conversation that is about to happen is genuine, not staged, not scripted, not a performance designed to achieve a political objective. The emperor looks at him. For a long time, neither man speaks. They study each other across the silence that separates them, and in that silence is everything, every battle, every treaty, every act of aggression and every gesture of peace, every moment of the long and complicated history that binds their two peoples together in a relationship that is part rivalry, part partnership, part mutual contempt, and part grudging, unwilling, undeniable respect. The emperor speaks first. He says, "So you are the one who married my daughter." The sultan says, "I am." The emperor says she was supposed to marry a prince of Trebizond, a Christian prince, a man of her own faith and her own blood and her own heritage. Instead, she chose you, a Turk, a Muslim, a man whose grandfather was a tribal chieftain who did not know how to read. The sultan does not flinch. He does not rise to the provocation. He says, "My grandfather could not read because he was too busy building the foundations of an empire. Your ancestors could read because they had servants who built their foundations for them. The question is not who could read and who could not. The question is whose foundations are still standing." The emperor stares at him, and then, slowly, against every expectation, against every precedent, against the accumulated weight of centuries of enmity and prejudice, and the deeply ingrained conviction of Byzantine superiority that has been the defining characteristic of every emperor who has ever sat on the throne of Constantinople, the emperor smiles. It is a thin smile, a tired smile, the smile of a man who has seen too much and lost too much and learned, through the brutal curriculum of experience, that the categories by which he used to organize the world, civilized and barbarian, Christian and infidel, Roman and Turk, are inadequate to describe the reality he now inhabits. He says, "My foundations are rubble. My son sits on my throne. My empire plots against me. And I am alive only because the barbarian who married my daughter had the decency to rescue me from the monastery where my own blood left me to die. So perhaps you are right. Perhaps the question is not who can read. Perhaps the question is who can endure." The sultan sits beside the bed. He says, "I did not rescue you out of decency, emperor. I rescued you because Asporça asked me to, and I rescued you because your survival serves my interests. I will not pretend otherwise. I will not dress this act in the clothing of pure compassion and expect you to believe it. You are too intelligent for that, and I respect you too much to insult your intelligence." The emperor's smile widens slightly. "Good," he says, "I distrust compassion from enemies. It usually means they want something. What do you want, Sultan Orhan?" The sultan says, "I want your son off the throne. I want the Byzantine Empire weakened from within. I want the provinces that lie between my territory and the strait to recognize Ottoman authority. And I want you alive, visible and vocal about what your son did to you, because a living, wronged emperor is the most powerful weapon I can wield against a usurper who claims legitimacy." The emperor considers this. The directness of the statement does not offend him. After years of Byzantine court politics, where nothing is ever said directly and every statement is wrapped in layers of euphemism and implication and strategic ambiguity, the sultan's bluntness is almost refreshing, almost pleasant, like cold water on a hot day, uncomfortable but invigorating. He says, "And what do I receive in return?" The sultan says, "Your life, your health, insofar as my physicians can restore it, the protection of my army, and when the time comes, when Andronikos has been weakened sufficiently, you will be returned to your throne, not by my hand directly, because a Byzantine emperor restored by a Turkish army would be a puppet, not a ruler, and I do not need puppets. I need a stable Byzantium on my western flank, a Byzantium led by a man who understands that coexistence with the Ottomans is not just possible, but necessary." The emperor is quiet for a long time. The candles flicker, the shadows move on the walls, and in the silence, a negotiation takes place that has nothing to do with words, a negotiation conducted entirely in the language of eyes and expressions and the subtle shifts of posture that reveal what the mouth refuses to say. It is the negotiation of two old adversaries who find themselves, through the absurd and unpredictable mechanics of fate, on the same side of a conflict that neither of them asked for and neither of them can avoid. Finally, the emperor nods. He says, "You are more like your father than you know, Sultan. Osman was also a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. I fought against him for 20 years, and in 20 years I never caught him in a lie. I hated him for many things, but I never hated him for dishonesty." The Sultan says, "My father taught me that a man's word is the only thing he truly owns. Everything else, his territory, his army, his power, his throne, can be taken from him. But his word belongs to him alone, and if he keeps it, nothing that is taken from him matters, because his honor remains intact. And if he breaks it, nothing that he gains matters, because his honor is gone. The emperor says, "Then I accept your terms, not because I trust you, but because I have no choice, and because your wife, my daughter, loves you, and Asporça was always the best judge of character in my family, better than me, better than her mother, certainly better than her brother. If she chose you, then you are worth choosing, and that is enough for now." The Sultan stands, he offers his hand. The emperor takes it, and the handshake that passes between them is not the handshake of friends or allies or even partners. It is the handshake of two men who have looked into the abyss and found each other there, standing on opposite edges, each one the only thing preventing the other from falling in. The Sultan leaves. Asporça, who has been waiting outside the door, sees his face as he emerges. She reads it the way she has learned to read all his expressions, like a map of a territory she is still exploring. She sees satisfaction. She sees resolution. She sees the faintest trace of something that might be amusement, as if the conversation he just had contained a moment of unexpected levity in the midst of its gravity. He pauses beside her. He says, "Your father is a remarkable man." She says, "I know." He says, "He insulted my grandfather." She says, "He insults everyone. It is how he shows respect." The Sultan allows himself the smallest of smiles. Then he walks on, and Asporça enters her father's chamber, and the door closes, and the world continues to turn. The western frontier, Ivanos meets the first village. The village is called Katafijan. It sits in a valley between two hills, a collection of stone houses and wooden barns, and a small church whose bell tower is the tallest structure for miles. It is home to perhaps 300 people, farmers and shepherds and craftsmen whose lives are governed not by the politics of empires, but by the rhythms of seasons, planting and harvesting, lambing and shearing, the eternal cycle of growth and decay that has sustained human communities since the first family settled beside the first river and decided to stay. Vanos approaches the village at dawn. He comes with 10 riders, having left the rest of his column concealed in the forest behind the ridge, visible enough to be seen by anyone watching from the hilltops, but hidden enough to avoid provoking panic in the village below. He carries no weapons visible. His armor is covered by a traveling cloak. His banner is furled. He looks, to the casual observer, like a merchant or a minor lord traveling with his escort, not like the vanguard of an expanding empire. The village elder meets him at the gate. He is an old man, weathered and bent, with hands that have spent decades in the earth and a face that has spent decades in the wind. His name is Theodoros, and he has been the elder of Katafijan for 30 years, through wars and plagues and famines, and the slow, grinding decline of the Byzantine state that has left communities like his increasingly isolated, increasingly unprotected, increasingly aware that the empire that is supposed to defend them has neither the resources nor the inclination to do so. Ivanos greets him in Greek, perfect Greek, the Greek of the court, not the rough dialect of the provinces, but softened with the warmth and informality that puts common people at ease. He introduces himself not by his Ottoman title, but by his birth name, the name he carried before his conversion, the name that Theodoros will recognize as the name of a man from his own world. Theodoros recognizes it. His eyes widen. He says, "I know that name. You are the son of the general who served under the old emperor. I heard you had gone over to the Turks. I heard you had converted." Ivanos says, "I have, and I have come to offer you the same opportunity." Theodoros's face hardens. He says, "You want us to abandon our faith, to become Muslims, to turn our church into a mosque and our crosses into crescents." Ivanos says, "No, I want you to keep your faith. I want you to keep your church and your crosses and your prayers and your saints. The Ottomans do not require conversion. The Ottomans require loyalty, and in exchange for loyalty, they offer something that your current emperor has failed to provide: protection, justice, the rule of law applied equally to all people, regardless of their faith or their heritage or the language they speak." When was the last time Constantinople sent soldiers to defend your village, Theodoros? When was the last time the empire collected your taxes and gave you something in return? When was the last time you felt that the man sitting on the throne in the capital cared whether you and your people lived or died? Theodoros does not answer. He does not need to. The answer is written on his face, in the deep lines carved by worry and the hollow look in his eyes that comes from years of abandonment, years of watching the roads for soldiers who never come, years of paying taxes to an empire that takes everything and gives nothing, years of knowing that if an enemy appears on the horizon, the only defense available to his village is the strength of its own arms and the mercy of God. Ivanos presses his advantage, but gently, with the patience of a man who understands that the decision he is asking Theodoros to make is not a political calculation, but an existential crisis. He is asking this man to transfer his allegiance from one civilization to another, from one world to another, from the familiar comfort of a failing system to the uncertain promise of a rising one. He is asking him to bet his life and the lives of his 300 villagers on the sincerity of a convert and the word of a Turkish sultan. He says, "I will not force you. That is not how we do things. You will decide freely with full knowledge of what you are choosing and what you are refusing. If you choose to remain under Byzantine authority, I will ride away and you will never see me again. Your village will continue as it has, unprotected, undefended, waiting for the next crisis to destroy what you have built. If you choose to accept Ottoman protection, a garrison will be posted here within the week. Your taxes will be reduced. Your disputes will be adjudicated by a judge who answers to the Sultan himself. Your church will remain open. Your priest will continue to serve. Your children will grow up in safety. And you will be part of something larger than yourself, larger than this village, larger than anything you have ever imagined." Theodoros looks at the man standing before him. He looks past the Ottoman cloak and the Muslim name and the convert's zeal and sees what is underneath. A man who was born into the same world he was born into, who speaks the same language, who understands the same fears, who carries the same heritage. And he sees something else. He sees certainty. The unmistakable, unshakable certainty of a man who believes in what he is doing, who is not merely following orders but fulfilling a calling, who offers not just protection but conviction. Theodoros says he needs time. He needs to consult with his people. He needs to pray. He needs to think about what is being offered and what it will cost, and whether the cost is worth the price. Ivanos agrees. He says he will make camp on the ridge and wait. He will wait for as long as Theodoros needs. A day, a week, a month. Time is not the enemy. Haste is the enemy. Decisions made in haste are decisions regretted at leisure. And the decision that Theodoros is facing is too important to be made in anything other than the careful, deliberate, prayerful manner that it deserves. He rides back to the ridge. He dismounts. He sits on a rock and looks down at the village and waits. And as he waits, he thinks about the other villages that lie beyond this one, the dozens of communities scattered across the Western territories, each one a small world unto itself, each one facing the same choice, each one carrying the same fears and the same hopes and the same desperate need for something, anything, that offers a future better than the present. He will visit them all, one by one, village by village, elder by elder, conversation by conversation. He will build the western frontier of the Ottoman Empire not with swords but with words, not with violence but with patience, not with the destruction of the old world, but with the construction of a new one that is capacious enough to contain both the old and the new, both the cross and the crescent, both the Greek and the Turk. This is his mission. This is his calling. This is the work that will define his life and his legacy and his place in the history that is being written with every step he takes and every word he speaks and every hand he extends in friendship to people who have been taught to see him as an enemy. Bursa, night, the war room. Halima's intelligence reports begin arriving. They come at all hours, carried by runners and riders and the occasional pigeon, fragments of information that must be assembled like the pieces of a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a portion of the truth, none of them sufficient on their own, but together forming a picture that is clear enough to act upon. The picture is grim. Andronikos has begun mobilizing. Ships are being provisioned in the harbors of Constantinople. Troops are being gathered from the provincial garrisons. Gold is being distributed to mercenary captains who care nothing for Byzantine pride or Ottoman ambition, but who will fight for whoever pays the most and pays on time. The machinery of the Byzantine military, rusty and neglected after years of decline, is being cranked back into operation, slowly, painfully, with the grinding reluctance of a mechanism that has been idle too long, but moving nonetheless, moving with the inexorable momentum of a state that still possesses, despite everything, the institutional memory and the material resources to wage war on a scale that the Ottomans have never faced before. Demirhan is recruiting. He has sent riders to the Turkmen tribes in the east, the tribes that have no love for Orhan, the tribes that resent Ottoman centralization, the tribes that see in Orhan's empire building not the fulfillment of a divine destiny, but the destruction of their traditional way of life, the replacement of tribal freedom with state authority, the subordination of the individual to the collective. These tribes are not natural allies of the Byzantines. They are Muslims. They are Turks. They share blood and language and faith with the Ottomans, but their loyalty is to their own clans, their own leaders, their own traditions, and Demirhan is offering them something that Orhan cannot, the promise that if the Ottoman state is destroyed, they will be free to return to the old ways, to the decentralized, tribal, nomadic existence that their grandfathers lived, and that they believe God intended for them. Shahanshah is fortifying. He has taken what remains of his forces and concentrated them in a series of strongpoints along the eastern approach to Ottoman territory, creating a defensive line that can serve as a staging area for the coming offensive. He is also reaching out to the Karachis, the principality that shares a border with the Ottomans to the south, offering them territorial concessions in exchange for military support, promising them the port cities and the coastal territories that they have coveted for generations and that the Ottomans currently control. And Yakid is active. The reports from Halima's network describe his movements in detail, the meetings he has attended, the messages he has carried, the information he has provided to the enemy about Ottoman troop dispositions and defensive preparations, and the location of the Sultan's forces. What Yakid does not know, what he cannot know, is that the information he is providing is false. Every troop position he reports has been changed since he was given access to it. Every defensive plan he describes has been modified. Every meeting he attends is observed by Halima's agents, who record what he says and to whom he says it and what he receives in return. The Sultan studies the reports. He stands at the map and moves the wooden figures that represent his forces, adjusting positions, recalculating distances, revising timelines. He is playing a game with a dozen opponents simultaneously, each one moving their pieces according to their own strategy, each one believing that they understand the board and the positions and the rules, and none of them realizing that the board itself has been redesigned, that the positions they think they know are false, that the rules they think they understand have been changed by a player whose moves they cannot see. He calls for Turhan. Turhan, who has been in the field for 3 days, training new recruits with the merciless efficiency of a man who believes that the best way to prepare soldiers for the horror of combat is to make their training more horrible than anything they will face on the battlefield. Turhan arrives covered in dust and sweat, and the general appearance of a man who has been living closer to the earth than to civilization. He stands before the Sultan and waits for his orders with the patient stillness of a blade waiting to be drawn. The Sultan says, "Turhan, I need you in the east." Turhan says, "The east." The Sultan says, Demirhan is recruiting from the Turkmen tribes. He is offering them freedom from Ottoman authority. He is telling them that we are their enemy, that our empire will destroy their way of life, that their only chance to preserve their traditions is to join his rebellion and tear down everything we have built. Turhan says nothing. His face is unreadable, but behind his eyes, something moves, something dark and dangerous and barely controlled, the response of a warrior who has spent his life fighting for a cause and who now learns that his own kinsmen, his own people, the people who share his blood and his language and his faith, are being recruited to destroy that cause. The Sultan continues. He says, I need you to go to these tribes. I need you to speak to their leaders. I need you to remind them who we are and what we stand for, and why the empire we are building is not the enemy of their traditions, but the fulfillment of them. Our empire does not destroy the old ways. It transforms them. It takes the courage and the loyalty and the warrior spirit that has defined our people for centuries and channels it toward a purpose greater than any single tribe, greater than any single clan, greater than any single man. We are not replacing the old world. We are building a new one on the foundations that the old world laid. And if they will not listen, the Sultan says, and his voice drops to the register that Turhan recognizes as the sound of a line being drawn in the sand, if they choose Damahan over me, if they choose rebellion over loyalty, if they choose the destruction of the Ottoman state over its preservation, then they have chosen their fate, and you will deliver it to them, swiftly, decisively, without hesitation and without mercy. Because mercy shown to traitors is cruelty shown to the loyal, and I will not sacrifice the many to spare the few. Turhan nods, a single nod, the nod of a man who has received an order and who will carry it out with the total, absolute, unquestioning commitment that defines his character. He does not ask for details. He does not request clarification. He does not raise objections or suggest alternatives. He nods, and in that nod is everything, the acceptance, the understanding, the willingness to ride into the heart of his own people and either bring them back to the fold or cut them from it forever. He leaves the war room. He descends the stairs. He crosses the courtyard. He mounts his horse, a massive war stallion whose black coat gleams like obsidian in the torchlight, and he rides east into the darkness, toward the tribes, toward the confrontation that will determine whether the Ottomans face the coming storm as a united people or as a fractured one. Behind him, the gates of Bursa close. The guards take their positions, the torches burn, and the city settles into the uneasy rest of a people who know that sleep is a luxury they may not be able to afford much longer. The village of Katafijan, dawn of the second day. Theodoros has not slept. He has spent the night in the church, on his knees before the altar, his lips moving in prayers that he has known since childhood, but that feel different tonight, heavier, more urgent, more desperately in need of an answer that does not come. The candles have burned down to stubs. The icons on the walls look down at him with painted eyes that see everything and reveal nothing. The silence of the church is the silence of God, and Theodoros does not know whether that silence is an answer or an absence. He has consulted with his people. He gathered them in the village square after Ivanos left, and he told them what the Ottoman had offered. He told them everything, holding nothing back, because he believes that the people who will live with the consequences of a decision should have a voice in making it. He told them about the garrison and the taxes and the judge and the protection. He told them about the church remaining open and the priest continuing to serve. He told them about the alternative, the continued isolation, the continued vulnerability, the continued hope that Constantinople would remember they exist and send the help that has been promised and promised again and postponed again for as long as any of them can remember. The village was divided. The young men who have energy but no experience wanted to accept immediately. The old men who have experience but no energy wanted to refuse. The women who have both energy and experience and the practical wisdom that comes from being responsible for the survival of families in a world that does not care whether families survive, were split. Some said that any protector is better than none. Others said that the Turks cannot be trusted, that their promises are as temporary as their presence, that they will take what they want and leave when it suits them, and the village will be worse off than before, having alienated the Byzantines without gaining the Ottomans. Theodoros listened to them all. He weighed their words. He measured their fears against their hopes and found them roughly equal, the scale balanced on a knife's edge, tipping neither toward acceptance nor toward refusal. And so he did what he always does when the decision is too difficult for the mind to make. He took it to God. He went to the church. He knelt before the altar, and he prayed. Now as the dawn light filters through the eastern window of the church and falls upon the altar in a golden shaft that looks like the finger of God pointing at the cross, Theodoros rises from his knees. His joints ache. His back is stiff. His eyes are red from sleeplessness and tears, and the strain of staring into darkness looking for light. But his face is calm. His expression is resolved. He has made his decision. He walks out of the church. He crosses the village square. He climbs the path that leads to the ridge where Ivanos has made his camp. The Ottoman is already awake, sitting beside a small fire, drinking something from a wooden cup, his face turned toward the east, where the sun is rising over the hills with the unhurried majesty of a celestial body that has been performing this same act since the beginning of time and sees no reason to change. Theodoros stops before him. He looks at the man who was born Greek and became Turkish, who was born Christian and became Muslim, who carries within him the contradiction that Theodoros himself is being asked to embrace, not the contradiction of conversion, but the contradiction of allegiance, the choice between the world you know and the world that is being offered. He says, I have prayed, I have consulted my people, I have spent the night asking God for guidance, and I believe that God has answered, not with words, not with visions, but with the simple truth that a shepherd who cannot protect his flock has no right to call himself a shepherd. Constantinople has not protected us. Constantinople has forgotten us. And a faith that commands us to care for the weak and the vulnerable does not command us to remain loyal to the powerful who have abandoned us. He pauses. He looks at the village below, the houses where his people are beginning to stir, the smoke rising from chimneys, the dogs barking, the children's voices carrying up the hillside on the morning air. He says, we will accept your offer. We will become part of the Ottoman state. We will pay our taxes and obey our judge and welcome your garrison. But hear me, son of the general, hear me and remember what I say. If you break your promise, if the protection you offer turns out to be a different kind of subjugation, if the church is closed or the priest is silenced or the faith of my people is threatened in any way, I will take my 300 villagers and I will walk them into the mountains and I will disappear into the wilderness and no army on earth will find us. Because I would rather live as a free beggar in the wilderness than as a comfortable slave in an empire. Ivanos stands. He sets down his cup. He faces Theodoros and extends his hand. He says, Theodoros, elder of Carthage, I give you my word, not the word of an empire, not the word of a sultan, my word, the word of a man who was born where you were born and who knows what it costs to leave everything behind and start again. The church will remain open. The priest will serve. The faith of your people will be respected. And if anyone, Ottoman or otherwise, tries to change this, they will answer to me. Theodoros takes his hand. The handshake is firm. It is the handshake of two men who do not fully trust each other, but who are willing to act on the insufficient trust they have because the alternative is worse. It is the handshake of pragmatists. It is the handshake of survivors. It is the handshake that builds empires, not the grand gestures of conquering generals, but the small, human, imperfect agreements of ordinary people making the best choice available to them in an imperfect world. Ivanos sends a rider back to Bursa. The rider carries a message for the Sultan. The message says that Carthage has accepted Ottoman authority, that no blood was shed, that no threat was made, that the village elder has agreed to the terms willingly and publicly, that the first stone of the western frontier has been laid. The Sultan will receive this message by nightfall. He will read it. He will nod. He will make a mark on his map. And then he will look west, toward the territories that still lie beyond Ottoman control, and he will see what Ivanos sees, the long road of patience and persuasion, and the slow, difficult, magnificent work of building something that will endure. Bursa, the palace, night. The Sultan sits in his chamber. The map is on the table before him. The wooden figures have been moved again, adjusted to reflect the new intelligence, the new alliances, the new threats. Beside the map is a letter, the letter from Ivanos, the first village, the first stone. He picks up the letter and reads it again. He reads the words that Ivanos has written, the spare, precise, military language that describes a conversation between two men on a hilltop, and the handshake that changed the political geography of the region by an increment so small that most people would not notice it. But the Sultan notices. The Sultan understands that empires are not built in single, dramatic strokes, but in thousands of tiny, incremental, almost invisible acts of persuasion and coercion and compromise and faith. The empire that his father dreamed of will not be won on a single battlefield. It will be one in 1,000 villages, one handshake at a time. He sets the letter down. He looks at the map. He sees the mark he has made, the small dot that represents Carthagena, barely visible among the larger symbols that represent cities and fortresses and military positions. But to the Sultan, that dot is more significant than any fortress, because a fortress can be taken by force. A village that joins willingly cannot be taken at all. It is already one. It is already part of the empire. Its people are already Ottoman, not by conquest but by choice, and that choice is the most powerful defense that any territory can possess. He thinks about Turhan, riding east through the darkness toward the Turkmen tribes. He thinks about the conversations that will happen there, conversations that will be harder and more dangerous than the one Ivanos had with Theodoros, because the tribes are not farmers and shepherds who want protection. They are warriors who want freedom. And the Sultan's message to them is not that he will protect them, but that he will lead them. And the distinction between protection and leadership is the distinction between the passive and the active, between the defensive and the offensive, between the shepherd and the king. He thinks about Halima, weaving her web of deception around Yaqid, feeding false intelligence to the enemy through the traitor's eager hands, constructing a reality that exists only in the minds of those who receive it, and that will crumble the moment it is tested against the world as it actually is. He thinks about the skill required for this kind of work, the meticulous attention to detail, the understanding of human psychology, the ability to construct a lie that is more convincing than the truth, and he is grateful, profoundly grateful, that this skill belongs to someone who serves him rather than someone who opposes him. He thinks about Asporça. He thinks about her sitting beside her father's bed, watching the slow, uncertain recovery of a man who was poisoned by his own son, holding his hand through the long hours of the night, while the physicians work their art, and the candles burn and the world outside the palace walls prepares for a war that will determine whether the bed she sits beside will be a place of healing or a place of death. He thinks about all of these things simultaneously, holding them in his mind the way a juggler holds a dozen objects in the air, each one in motion, each one requiring attention, each one threatening to fall if he takes his eyes off it for even a moment. And he does not let any of them fall, because he is the Sultan, because he is the son of Osman, because he was born for this, bred for this, trained for this. Called to this by a destiny that he did not choose, but that he has accepted with the total, absolute, unconditional surrender that is the truest form of strength. He closes his eyes, he breathes, he allows himself one moment of stillness in the ceaseless motion of his life, one moment in which he is not the Sultan, but just a man, sitting alone in a room with a map and a letter and the weight of the world on his shoulders and the voice of God in his heart. And then he opens his eyes, and the moment is over, and the Sultan is back, and the work continues. Because the work never stops. Because the empire never sleeps. Because the war is not over. And it will not be over until every village has been visited, and every tribe has been spoken to, and every traitor has been exposed, and every enemy has been defeated, and every stone has been laid in the great building that Osman dreamed of and Orhan is constructing, and generations, yet unborn, will inherit and expand until it stretches from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Indian Ocean, from the deserts of Africa to the steppes of Central Asia. An empire so vast and so enduring that the world will never forget its name. But that is the future. And the future begins now. With a letter from a village. With a handshake on a hilltop. With a man sitting alone in a room. With a prayer spoken in the darkness. With a breath taken in faith. And released in hope. The war is not over. The night is deep. The dawn is coming. And the Ottoman star, the star that Asporça called Phosphorus and the Sultan called Zura, burns in the western sky like a promise that has not yet been kept, but that will be kept, inshallah, in the fullness of time. The war is not over. But the Ottomans are ready. They have always been ready. They were born ready. And they will die ready. And between the birth and the death, between the first breath and the last, between the first stone and the final tower, they will build. They will build. They will build. Do remember us in your prayers.
Stores. Tamir Boga and Mustafa secured the river approaches, ensuring water flowed but could be poisoned if need demanded. Zarkin Kulad's Kilal Al-Alyadin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib moved among the troops, their presence steadying frayed nerves with quiet oaths and shared prayers. Allah tests the faithful not with ease but with fire that refines, Arhin Sahib said, voice resonant and calm amid the gathering storm. Shahanshah sought to drown us in shadows from without and betrayal from within. He failed. Now this new horde comes, drawn by the same lies. We will not break. We will turn their rage into their undoing. He descended to the chamber, where maps of the surrounding lands, captured from Shahanshah's own archives, lay spread upon a great table still stained with the blood of the final stand. The captains leaned in as Arhin Sahib traced strategies with a bloodied dagger. We do not wait passively. Tarhin, take 2,000 of our finest riders and the turned horde contingent. Circle wide to the north under cover of the remaining forest fringes. Harass their supply trains, cut their rear, sow confusion with night raids and false banners. Make them fear ghosts in the dark. Palladios, you command the defense of the eastern wall, the most exposed. Reinforce the cracks with earth and timber. Prepare oil and fire of our own. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman hold the western and southern approaches. Dig deeper trenches, plant stakes to break charges. Damir Khan, your archers will be the teeth of every defense. Conserve arrows until the press is thick. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, range the river with small boats and fire arrows. Disrupt any attempt to cross or poison our lifeline. Altuddin Sahib, Yun Zarkin Kulad's Kilal Al-Alyadin Sahib, Jarkata Sahib, maintain order within the city. Feed the people, tend the wounded, watch for any spark of internal betrayal. The wavering frontier captains must be reminded of their oaths. Send swift riders with proof of Shahanshah's fall and Yakid's judgment. The orders spread like sacred fire through the ranks. As the day wore on, the city transformed once more from a conquered ruin into a fortress reborn in haste. Men worked without rest, hauling stones, sharpening blades, reciting verses from the holy book to steel their hearts. Arhin Sahib moved among them, his presence a living banner of resolve. To a group of weary spearmen he spoke softly. You have seen the forest burn and the palace fall. This horde is but another shadow cast by the same dying light. Stand firm and Allah will grant us victory as he has before. To the citizens who gathered in the squares he proclaimed mercy and justice. The tyrant is gone. Serve the true path and this city shall rise stronger, not as a den of lies but as a beacon of honor. Yet as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward the approaching dust, the first probes came. Small bands of enemy scouts, bold riders on swift horses, tested the outer defenses, losing air, lunged with the desperation of a cornered animal. Their blades met in a ringing clash that echoed through the smoke-filled hall. Shahanshah fought with wild, frenzied strokes, each blow fueled by fear rather than skill. Arhin Sahib parried with measured precision, his movements economical, guided by years of faith and discipline. You traded the souls of your people for power, Arhin Sahib said between strikes, voice steady. Now power abandons you. Shahanshah snarled, swinging low. Arhin sidestepped and countered with a cut that opened a shallow wound across the ruler's arm. Blood stained the fine robes. The false king staggered back against his throne, breathing hard. You cannot kill me. I am the Shahanshah. The blood of kings flows in my veins. Your blood is no different from any other man's when spilled upon the stones of justice, Arhin Sahib replied quietly. With a final, powerful thrust, Arhin Sahib drove his blade through the gap in Shahanshah's defenses, piercing the heart of the betrayal that had poisoned the land. Shahanshah's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He clutched at the steel protruding from his chest, a gurgling gasp escaping his lips. Fate has judged, he whispered, echoing Yakid's final words before collapsing upon the steps of his own throne, lifeless. A profound silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the heavy breathing of the victors. Tarhin and Palladios finished their opponents almost simultaneously. The last of the elite guards threw down their weapons, kneeling in surrender. Courtiers wept openly, some in relief, others in fear of what would come next. Arhin Sahib withdrew his blade and wiped it clean upon the fallen ruler's cloak. He turned to his captains, voice ringing with solemn authority. The head of the serpent is severed. Let it be known throughout the city, Shahanshah is no more. Those who fought for him in ignorance shall be shown mercy. Those who profited from his lies will face judgment. The fires must be quenched. The people fed, order restored in the name of justice and the Almighty. Yet even as victory in disarray. Night began to fall once more, the battlefield lit by the hellish glow of dying fires and fresh torches. The horde pulled back slightly to regroup, their numbers still vast but their spirit tested by the day's butcher's bill and the fires in their rear. Inside the city, men tended wounds by lantern light, sharing water and bread with the citizens who now openly supported the defenders, bringing what little they had to sustain the fight. Orhan Sahib gathered his captains in a hastily cleared square near the palace. Faces were drawn, bodies weary, yet eyes burned with resolve. "We have held," he said, voice carrying the rhythmic weight of destiny. "The walls stand though scarred, the people see our justice, but the night brings new peril. The northern riders draw near, aid or knife in the dark we cannot yet know. Turhan's raids have bought us breathing room, but the horde will come again at dawn, perhaps with greater fury. We must prepare for encirclement, for sapping anew, for the slow grind that tests the soul." Faladios wiped blood from his cheek. "Let them come. We have faced forest ambush, palace fire, and now this storm of horsemen. Honor does not break." Yet as scouts reported the northern force closing, 500 spears under Captain Raman, true to his word, but shadowed by rumors of other garrisons still hesitating, a deeper tension settled. Psychological blows continued. Captured horde warriors were treated with mercy and released with messages of truth, planting seeds of doubt in the enemy camp. "Your chieftains die for a dead man's gold," the released men were told. Orhan Sahib offers justice, not chains. The night deepened, stars veiled by lingering smoke. Prayers rose in continuous waves from every corner of the city. Orhan Sahib walked the walls alone for a moment, gazing eastward where the horde campfires burned like a sea of accusing eyes. "The war sharpens once more," he whispered to the wind. "Betrayal lurks in every shadow, but so does victory for those who endure. By dawn, we shall see whether the northern coin lands on faith or fear." As the first stars pierced the haze, distant horns sounded from the north, Raman's arrival confirmed, swelling their ranks modestly but crucially. Yet the horde stirred in response, preparing for a night assault or a renewed dawn press. Smoke still curled from the plains, fire still smoldered on the walls, and the chaos of steel and will hung in precarious balance. The defense held, but the greater test loomed. A new betrayal could ignite from the hesitant garrisons, or a decisive counter could break the horde's back. Orhan Sahib returned to his captains, blade clean but ready, his voice a quiet oath in the darkness. "We march not backward but deeper into fate's embrace. Prepare every trap, every prayer, every drop of blood. The Almighty witnesses. This night will not claim us, it will forge us stronger for the dawn that follows." And so the epic struggle pressed onward, unrelenting through smoke and flame, honor and doubt, into the heart of a war that refused to yield its final secret. The hordes waited beyond the walls, the northern allies rode in under uncertain banners, and inside the city the flame of justice burned brighter than any besieger's fire, a beacon that promised either glorious deliverance or a cataclysmic reckoning yet to unfold. The story of Steel and Soul continued, its next chapter written in the blood of the coming clash, where loyalty would be weighed and fate would speak with the voice of thunder. The night had thickened into an almost tangible darkness, the kind that pressed against the chest and made every breath feel like a prayer offered against the void. Smoke from the day's fires still lingered over the city like a funeral shroud, curling lazily around the battlements and drifting through the narrow streets where exhausted defenders snatched moments of uneasy rest. Lanterns burned low along the walls, their flickering light casting long, wavering shadows that danced like uneasy spirits. Orhan Sahib stood upon the eastern parapet once more, his silhouette carved against the faint glow of the horde's distant campfires, a vast, malevolent constellation that stretched across the plains like the eyes of 1,000 hungry wolves. The air carried the heavy scent of charred wood, spilled blood, and the faint, acrid promise of more violence yet to come. Below him, the city stirred fitfully. Wounded men groaned in makeshift infirmaries, citizens moved silently with buckets of water and bundles of bread, and captains walked the lines offering quiet words of steel and faith. Tarhan approached from the shadows, his steps measured, the bandage on his shoulder now dark with fresh seepage. Raman has arrived with his 500 spears, Orhan Sahib. They bolster the northern gate and the reserves, but the other frontier captains, they send only silence. Some may yet ride against us if they scent weakness. The horde knows this. Their scouts probe the darkness even now, testing for soft places in our resolve. Faladios joined them, his face streaked with soot and dried blood, eyes burning with the unquenched fire that had carried him through Yakid's duel and the palace reckoning. The eastern wall holds, but it bleeds. Another heavy push at dawn will test every stone. Their numbers allow them to rotate fresh riders while we grow weary. We must strike first, hit their camp under cover of this moonless night. Let fire and chaos be our answer before they swallow us whole. Orhan Sahib turned, his gaze sweeping across the gathered captains who had assembled in the torchlit square below the palace steps. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman stood shoulder to shoulder, their spears planted like banners of defiance. Emir Khan checked the tension on his bowstring with practiced fingers. Tamir Boga and Mustafa conferred quietly with Altuddin Sahib, while Zarkin Kuled's Kilal Al-Alyadin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib maintained their vigilant watch over the inner defenses. The turned horde riders waited at the edge, their loyalty still a fragile bridge, yet proven in the day's bloody press. By the name of the all-knowing who sees every hidden betrayal and every act in a whirlwind of blades and curses, Faladios prevailed, hurling the man from the height with a roar of defiance that rallied the defenders. Yet the numbers pressed hard. The horde surged like an unstoppable wave, and somewhere in the chaos, new whispers of internal doubt surfaced, a captain's hesitation, a delayed reinforcement. The northern garrison's coin still spun in the air. Orhan Sahib rode into the fray himself, blade flashing, Tarhan ever at his side intercepting death. The war raged on, fiercer than the forest ambush or the palace fall, the outcome hanging by the slender thread of faith, strategy, and unbreaking loyalty. As the sun climbed and the blood flowed, the distant northern horizon showed faint movement, perhaps aid, perhaps further betrayal. The city held for now, but the storm had broken fully upon them, promising that this day's end would bring either glorious victory or a new, darker chapter of siege and shadow. The march of justice continued, unrelenting into the heart of the tempest, where fate itself would decide whether honor or the hordes claimed the final word. The war, vast and unforgiving, pressed onward, its next betrayal or triumph lurking just beyond the smoke and steel. The sun climbed mercilessly over the smoke-choked plains, turning the dust of 10,000 hooves into a golden haze that blinded the eye and choked the throat. Orhan Sahib sat astride his stallion atop the cracked eastern battlements, his armor reflecting the harsh light in dull, blood-flecked glints. Below him, the horde surged like a living sea, riders clad in furs and scaled leather, their wolf-skull banners snapping in the wind, lances lowered and bows drawn in a ceaseless rain of arrows that clattered against stone and shield alike. The air vibrated with the thunder of hooves, the war cries in harsh steppe tongues, and the relentless beat of their great drums that seemed to echo the very pulse of impending doom. Allah the Protector, the subduer of armies, Orhan Sahib murmured, his voice steady mid the growing roar, one hand gripping the hilt of his blade while the other rested upon the shoulder of a wounded defender. You have delivered the city and the tyrant into our hands. Now let these pagan shadows break upon the walls of justice as waves break upon unyielding rock. Beside him, Faladio stood like a pillar of wrath, his sword already drawn and dripping from the first clashes at the breach. Arrows and attempting to draw out defenders. Daimir Khan's archers answered with disciplined volleys, felling several and sending the rest fleeing back into the growing cloud. One captured scout bound and brought before Orhan Sahib spat defiance, "Your walls will crumble like your false justice. The hordes come for blood and the gold you stole from our ally. Surrender now or watch your city burn as you burned his dreams." Orhan Sahib regarded him without anger. "Your ally was a serpent whose venom has dried. Tell your masters that justice does not fear numbers, it weighs the heart." Psychological warfare deepened on both sides. From the enemy lines, as they drew nearer in the fading light, came the rhythmic beat of war drums and chants in harsh tongues designed to instill fear. Captured banners of Shahanshah were waved mockingly, and messengers shouted offers of safe passage for any who abandoned Orhan Sahib. Inside the city, some wavered whispers of 10,000 against 6 spread like smoke. But Turhan moved swiftly among the doubters, his voice a gravelly oath. "We faced ambush in darkness and duel in fire. Numbers mean nothing when faith guides the blade." Faladio's, ever the fierce rival turned steadfast ally, reinforced the message with tales of Yakid's end and Shahanshah's final gasp, turning fear into resolve for many. Night fell once more, heavier and more oppressive than any previous. The horde campfires bloomed on the horizon like a sea of malevolent stars, their glow visible for miles. Orhan Sahib convened his captains again in the palace chamber, now lit by lanterns and guarded heavily. "The main clash comes at dawn or sooner. We must strike first where they least expect Tarhan's night raid on their rear. Let chaos be our ally as fire and smoke were before. If they press the walls, we make every breach cost them dearly in blood." As the meeting ended, a lone rider galloped into the city from the north, horse lathered and eyes wild. It was one of the messengers sent to the frontier garrisons. He knelt before Orhan Sahib, delivering grim news. "Two captains have declared neutrality, Orhan Sahib. They claim to await the outcome, fearing the horde's wrath. But one Captain Raman sends secret word. He will ride to join us at first light with 500 spears if we hold until then. The others, they watch and wait, their loyalty a coin yet to be tossed." The revelation hung heavy, betrayal's shadow lingered even in victory. Tarhan's fist clenched, Faladio's muttered an oath. Orhan Sahib placed a hand on the map, tracing the northern routes. "Then we buy time with steel and faith. Tarhan, begin your raid as planned. Faladio's, hold the east with unbreaking will. We turn this city into the anvil. Let the hordes hammer upon it until they shatter." The night deepened. Tarhan slipped out with his force under cover of darkness, vanishing into the plains like wolves on the hunt. Faladio's walked the eastern battlements, inspecting every crack, every barrel of oil. Inside, prayers rose continuously from the ranks, settled over the palace like a heavy cloak. A scout burst into the chamber, face pale beneath the grime. He dropped to one knee before Orhan Sahib, gasping for breath. "Orhan Sahib, the eastern horizon, the main body of the hordes has been sighted. Not 3,000, but nearly 10,000 strong. They ride under new banners, united now not merely by gold, but by rage at the death of their chieftain and the broken promises of Shahanshah. They will reach the city walls by nightfall. And there is more. Writers from the north report that some of our own frontier garrisons have begun to waver, tempted by rumors that the war is lost and new powers rise in the vacuum. Tarhan's hand tightened on his hilt. Faladios exchanged a dark glance with Arhan Sahib. The captains shifted uneasily. The city was theirs, but the greater storm had only drawn closer. Arhan Sahib stood tall upon the dais, the body of Shahanshah at his feet, the smoke still curling around the shattered grandeur of the palace. He looked out through the broken windows toward the eastern horizon, where a faint but growing dust cloud stained the sky like an approaching eclipse. "The war does not end with one man's death," he said, voice low yet carrying the weight of destiny. "It merely changes its face. We have taken the city, but now we must defend it against the very darkness Shahanshah sought to unleash. Gather every able man, quench the fires, secure the granaries and the walls. We will turn this conquered fortress into the anvil upon which the next wave of betrayal will shatter." He placed a hand upon the hilt of his sword, eyes burning with unquenchable resolve. "Tarhan Faladios, all of you my brothers in blood and faith. The night approaches once more, heavier than any before. Prepare the defenses. Send word to every corner of the realm that justice